of education in any country is one of the keys to national development. Sadly, the gradual decline in our education system in Nigeria poses a lot of questions as to what is the reason for this decline and how can we change the narrative. That is why today we're going to be discussing on how we can confront the challenges that have faced our education system in recent times. And of course, I have an esteemed gentleman right here with me in the studio. But I'm going to be introducing him after this timeout. Do stay with us. My name is Priska Wonko. Welcome to In Depth right here on EBS Television. You're welcome back. In case you just joining the program, this is still In Depth on EBS Television. And just before that timeout, I said that today will be my spotlight on confronting the challenges facing our education system right here in Nigeria. And it's with great pleasure that I welcome Professor Charles Okechukwu Esimone. Prof, welcome to ABS. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Priska.
Okay. Now, Professor Charles Okechukwu Esimone is a professor of biopharmaceutics and pharmaceutical biotechnology. And of course, he is the Vice Chancellor of Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. Yeah, you see, it's a great pleasure to have you here once more.
Thank you.
All right, now, Prof, as somebody in the education system, you're no longer a stranger to some of the challenges that we face right here in the country with regards to standard of education and quality of education. But we'd like to know, what are some of those problems and is there hope to get out of them?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Priska. Well, if we want to discuss the challenges confronting the educational sector, it's important to identify the stakeholders. There are about 5 stakeholders that play a very significant role in the educational sector in Nigeria. The first is the government, of course, and then you have the parents, and then you have the universities, and then you have the students, and then very importantly, you also have people who are working from the background, who are affected by some of the activities that take place in the university. And they play a very key role, one way or the other. The government's role is pivotal. We want to talk about challenges. Government has to bring out policies that will drive educational sector, to the desired height. As we speak now, we know that there is a basic benchmark for funding of educational sector set, by UNESCO. Should be between 4 to 6% of the GDP. And the nations that have surmounted the challenges that we see confronting us in Nigeria, some of them have even surpassed that basic minimum. Even in Africa, a country like South Africa, the GDP, the percentage of the GDP that the educational sector occupies is about 6%. And that's why they are soaring very high. So there's no other way out. So that is very pivotal. But that notwithstanding, we also know that parents play a very significant role. Parents have this notion in this country that except you are a student, you are in a professional course, then you are nobody. There are people whose calling will be technical education. But the parent will say, I want my child to be a doctor. It's not you wanting your child to be anything. It's that child identifying where he or she has competencies and then going for that place, for that particular course or program. We don't see that in the country. People impose what courses their children will study in the university, and then without cost to the child's innate, aptitude. And that's a big problem. Not only that, the students are also very important stakeholders. Now, the emphasis on colonial kind of education. The colonial system of education prepares people, to just get certificate. And because people just want to brandish certificate, they don't give a damn on whether they learn in order to get it or whether they use hook or crook to get it. So those who are indulging in exam misconduct, and these are powerful challenges that the psyche of the youth, has to be changed. That's not the way to go. You need to develop confidence and personal aptitude. You need to study. You need to acquire skills, not by just brandishing certificate or so. So the youth have to know that so that they will say no on their own to any form of exam malpractice, to any form of incursion that want to hinder them to get the proper education. If they don't say no, you will keep on fighting this. Even if you provide the best facilities there, somebody will still tell you that since certificate is what pays, let me, however I get it. It's very important.
All right, Prof. Now, while you were speaking, you mentioned something about the curriculum, changing the curriculum. And earlier this month in the news, some major stakeholders in the education sector were calling for an overhaul of the school curriculum system. And when some lecturers, teachers were interviewed, they said that we interviewed them. So the opinion was that changing of the curriculum is not something that is done in a day, that it's something that people will come together, discuss, and come up with an appropriate method. But what I'm saying is, now, this curriculum that people use to educate the students, you find out that 10 years, 20 years, people graduate, they're still being taught the same thing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a lot of things have happened over the years. Now, do we need to wait when meetings are called before those things happen, seeing that the world is going global and innovations keep coming up every day? So whose responsibility is it when it comes to the school curriculum change and all that?
Yeah, so that's why I said that the different stakeholders are important. In terms of change of curriculum, in the university, we have the universities play a role, but we're talking about the university as a system that is governed by the National Universities Commission. And the National Universities Commission is actually doing that, I must say. They are doing that. They are moving from they are so dynamic now that they are now requesting for benchmark, minimum benchmark, the changing curriculum, they are meeting that, they are doing that. But the problem, I tell you, is that those who are supposed to implement some of these changes back in the universities, many times they are very, very reluctant because change is a very difficult thing. I'll give you an example. If in my profession, for instance, in pharmacy, we are trying to move from the traditional, drug production, dispensing to clinical practice, where people need to now go to the clinic. You have to identify patients, you have to interact with patients and know their need before you are talking about prescribing and even producing. Several institutions, because they don't have the capacity, the manpower to do that, they are still operating the old system. And now the council has given a deadline, say, if by 2020, we have to go to the program they call PharmD, instead of BPharm. People must move to PharmD, the doctor of clinical pharmacy, which is where countries like America have gone, and there's significant improvement in terms of service delivery. Because why we change curriculum is so that your service to the community, to your environment, will be palpable. People will know if you have an engineer who is a civil engineer and he graduates and he does not know how to even construct road or have to amend or how to make some amendments in buildings or things that have to do with their civil engineering, nobody will envy that person. The case where some employers say, "Oh, can't employ you because you don't have the basic competencies." So those things have to do with the curriculum, how the mode of teaching in the universities. So now we're advocating that it will be experiential learning. That means, especially for the sciences, even for the humanities, it will be experiential learning, the didactic learning, and then what the society needs, what the industry needs, what the different sectors need. People, experts from there will be part of the teaching and learning of that. In Germany, it's being practiced, and that is working very well. In some parts of Europe, it's being practiced. In America, also, experiential learning is coming up, it's being practiced. An expert from the industry or from the service sector will come and handle a course, and he's telling you what is applicable in the field, and you are matching it with the theory that you are getting. Here, it's difficult. They will say, if you don't have PhD, you don't have this, you cannot teach.
True.
So that side needs to change.
Okay, so how those policies now that you've implemented in your own university, how has it been working out so well for the institution?
Yeah, so it's a graduate. We just started. I'm just 1 year old. So, and
Wow.
we have 1 year. We started, and they had close to 1 year we lost due to COVID-19
the coronavirus.
and the ASU strike. So we're just about starting, but we implemented those, and we were pushing just 2 months, and then there was a strike, and so we hope that it's going to work, because the important thing is to make those who implement it to see themselves as critical stakeholders. If they see themselves as critical stakeholders, they say this thing is like a building. We are the pillars in this building. If we are not there, this building, no matter how beautiful it is, will fall. If they see themselves that way, then they buy into it and they will start running with it. So that's what we are trying to do, making them to see it as their own and buy it.
Okay, all right, so we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that was brought by the COVID-19 and the response of the institutions, the universities, the secondary schools to this challenge, and of course the new normal, which is e-learning after this time out. Yeah, welcome back. This is still In Depth on EBS Television, and of course, we are still chatting with Professor Charles Okechukwu, Esiboding Vice Chancellor Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka, and also Professor of Biopharmaceutics and Pharmaceutical Biotechnology. Remember, our spotlight is on confronting the challenges bedeviling our education system right here in Nigeria. And just before that time, Prof, I told you that when we come back, we'll be talking about some of the challenges that was brought by the COVID-19 and how institutions rose to this challenge and what is being done now. So,
thank you. Challenges, one of the primary challenges brought by COVID-19, very pivotal, is the inability for people to meet together, gather in large number. You know, what in the Nigerian educational system, one of the basic problems you find if you go in every institution is that you have small classes, large number of students. You hardly will see a classroom where the number of students are commensurate with the size of that classroom. It's not possible. You always see like that, except for some programs that are not very well subscribed to. Okay, but for general courses, you see that. So that number. So one problem is how to teach and how to administer with exams or in that kind of large class. So to solve that challenge, we are advocating blended learning. Blended learning, the case where at some point, you have face-to-face contact. At another point, you now have to use online teaching platform. And that in itself, good as it is, has a lot of challenges that we must talk about because they are very crucial. The primary one is this online teaching requires data, both on the part of the students and on the part of the lecturers. For instance, in my university, we provided 3STM1 Wi-Fi inside the campus. But then some of the lecturers are saying, must we all come to the campus?
Yeah.
If we all come to the campus in order to use it, then the same problem, the contact we're trying to avoid, we'll still have it again. We want a system whereby we'll stay in our houses, we'll stay in places different and administer lectures. Students can also stay in their hostels. They don't need to come together again. And I saw a sense in that. But to overcome that, it means we must have a platform whereby data is made very cheap, provided to staff and students very cheap. The government can come into this. It's a major challenge. Now, for my own university, for instance, we have been able to convince people to do online teaching. They are doing that, but they're complaining that the data that they use to do that, even the students are complaining that the data that we used to do, the cost of that data to stay for lectures for maybe 15 hours in a week, using video, heavy data, who is going to bear that cost? So government can come in by, because education, whatever is used for education should be free, by providing a special tariff for data, subsidy for the educational sector through these network providers, whether MTN or Airtel or so. They can provide, say, we are giving this data bundle if we are giving for educational purposes. It is at maybe little or no profit, or they give incentives to staff, to students. And the budget, because the budget that is given to university is very, very low. But if this is given as a support for this blended learning, I tell you, people will embrace it, and it will solve a lot of problems. Number one, it is very efficient, and if it's 1 hour, you are giving lecture for 1 hour because you know that you are spending money. Not just that you are giving lectures, but time is money, and the people know that. So government can do something, and put that one as kind of policy. The second aspect, the second option, which of course is not very feasible, that people have to pay for it. People have to pay for it. But if you look at the economy of the nation, you look at how parents are suffering. If you are now telling them again that we want to give you this teaching, this learning, but you'll be paying for it, there's going to be a lot of resistance. But if we want to learn, if we want to teach holistically, that may be the fastest option. a little fee or so. You have to pay for it. I'm making an arrangement in my university to provide that. But then, but I'm using another method. I'm trying to contact, we're looking for, philanthropists. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're appealing to philanthropists, pleading with them, say, we want to do this for our students. Can you please fund this? Can you please sponsor this so that we can give our staff and our students data to do learning? So it's like we are begging, but it's working out. Some people are responding. I hope many of them will respond. And if they respond very well, then we'll be able to provide this data, because on our own, we don't have the financial capability to maintain and sustain that. So it's either government is giving us, or some other person who is a philanthropist, or any NGO, or any other non-governmental agencies. So we do pay for that. We're also applying to banks, different bodies, to help subsidize for this data. So that's a big one. Another challenge, which the COVID-19 is bringing, is that a lot of people, and that is, a lot of people take it for granted. COVID in itself, research has shown that, the people staying long, of course, and then the COVID infection, there's some psychological imbalance people are having. So we may not rule out the fact that if you look at statistics, a lot of people, you hear suicide, you hear rape, these are all signs of psychological breakdown, which need to be tackled. We are a nation where we don't pay much attention to, you see people, somebody laugh, you don't know what is passing through. In a developed world, people, they have, in schools, they have counselors, they have, guidance and counselors who take care of psychological needs of people, and they understand, they identify that. Many schools don't have that. We have set up that center in my university. Yeah, we have set up that center. We have center, and in the Senate, we had Senate the other time. We encourage even lecturers to come, because you may be passing through some. Yes, you wouldn't know. You don't know that you are sick or so. So it is a very big one, which we need to encourage people to open up. And as you come, as you open up, there are counselors there, there are experts there who will counsel, and then you are. You flip out of that stage, and then you don't go. Otherwise, we have many students coming back, suicidal, and the tendency is for them to revolt, for them to, you see this restiveness. It's not that they want to be, but it's a psychological imbalance that took place because of both the effect of the COVID, the effect of the long lockdown, which we have to tackle. That's my suggestion.
Okay. Now, Prof, how do you see this blended learning? Has it actually come to stay? And what do you see in the future, the near future? What's the projection? Where do you see this blended learning going to?
So blended learning has actually come to stay. There's no going back, because if you take statistics of what is happening in other climes, as a nation, there's a way we move. We are slowly behind development, like countries like Ghana, even South Africa, long before now. They have been adopting blended learning. They give their exams, give lectures online. So they have been doing that for some time. And now COVID-19 has made it compulsory for some of us who were slow catchers, as a nation, to key in. So it has come to stay. It is a very effective way of actualizing needs and curriculum within a short time. There are several advantages that we have with the online teaching. For some institutions, for instance, we can, in your own field, even in my own field now, we can receive lectures from Harvard University. A lecturer who is in Harvard, visiting professor who cannot come to Nigeria because of whatever, like in the past, if you have this e-learning platform, they can be delivering lectures from Harvard, from the best universities. Collaboration can now be extended beyond the shores of our traditional collaboration, because these people don't need to come physically. There's a huge advantage. The same kind of learning that you get if it comes face-to-face. You can ask him a question, you will see that distance is not a barrier. Two, it saves cost. The cost of physical infrastructure, large spaces, as the case may be, we don't have all the time. You have that. And even if somebody is coming from abroad, as I said, who is an expert to give that kind of lecture, the cost of flight, accommodation, other things, risk insurance, those ones are cut off. They can give that to you free of charge. So it has come to stay, and I encourage that people should key into it. It is the way of the future. Other nations started it about 10 years ago, and are still doing that up to now. So our coming in now, it's not as if we're coming on time, but then it's
Well, late
better.
in
Yes, yes, it's better that it's late than that we
Than
never.
never.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Prof, you mentioned something about reaching out to philanthropists when you were talking about data helping
Yeah.
the students. Now, do you think private-public collaboration will help in any way in reviving our education system? A system whereby, as institutions, public enterprises reach out to some of those private investors to come together and work together. Will it help?
Ah, you are talking my mind. Yes, when I took over as vice chancellor, I saw that there are several things that on our own we couldn't accomplish because we don't have the funding. So I went the way of PPP, public-private partnership. It's very effective. For instance, we need hostels in the university. We don't have funding for that. So what I've done, we engage public-private partnership that come in, even some of our medical services, some of the online services that we have is by public-private partnership. Right as we speak now, we have moved, we are doing online transcript, everything is online. Many of the CCTV cameras, we have CCTV cameras in classrooms, in the streets, online. It's public-private partnership because we don't have funding for that. Many of the ICT revolutions that we are carrying is by PPP because we don't have funding for that. So that's the way to go. But it's a very difficult thing in Nigeria because investors are very skeptical. They don't know. They know that the nation is unstable.
Yeah.
VCs come and stay just 5 years and go, and that person may come and then change and scatter everything. But we are using a very standard procedure to do that. We are going through all the way. We'll go through ICCRC, Infrastructure Concession Commission. We'll go through our parent ministry, and then eventually to be approved by the Federal Executive Council, so that whether the vice chancellor initiated is there or not, it's go. So public-private partnership is the way to go for Nigerian universities.
All right. Now, Prof, COVID-19 and the lockdown and some of the challenges made a lot of youths to engage in skills, with also the strike, in order to make ends meet. Now, this seems to have reduced their interest in education because you see some people saying they're now doing business, they're now making money and all those things. And with most of them engaging in these skills and becoming their own bosses, it seems to reduce their interest in education. How do you think we can handle this kind of situation?
I think we can solve that problem. That's why right now, like in my universities, we have not just the regular education, we also have what we call a CEP, Continuing Education Program.
Yeah.
I think without any prejudice that people, the basic need of education is to give you knowledge for you to, be an entrepreneur or innovative and put food on the table. It's not just for you to work in an office or things like that. So those of them who have engaged in those skills, and these are skills that is actually knowledge-based, we encourage them, it's fine, but they can also come back and complete their education. But as I said, we can provide alternative, like it's done in different parts of the world. Those who are busy, chief executive, who are busy, who still want some education in specific areas, we create avenue for them. That's where this blended learning will come. That's where this online teaching platform will come. They don't need to come physically. We may put it, distant learning program where we do that online weekends in the night. And it's done in some universities, even in Nigeria, and I just discovered a few universities.
Okay.
They do that in the night, start from maybe 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock every day in the night. Some people take that one and go. So this set of students can also fit in there. But I'm not an advocate that you must, if you are doing well, you must come back. But it's good to get basic education. And you can get that education through this other means, either CEP program or the distant learning program that we are doing and so on and so forth in business. We can get it through that means. And so it calls for more investment in this kind of education. So that not just the normal regular education where people come and go out. People can be doing their own in the night or in the evenings or on the weekends.
All right. Now, Prof, this discussion cannot be complete if we don't talk about the ever-popular strikes. That it's a constant recurring decimal in our education system. How do we handle this kind of situation? Because right now, the ASU strike plus the COVID-19 and all that affected a lot of students. And every year, every day, since I was born, practically, I've been hearing strike, and it seems not to be stopping. Isn't there a permanent solution?
Yeah, so there are no 1 plus 1 equal to 2 answer to it. But I would say that there's a permanent solution. The unions. And if you heard me from the very beginning, I said the fundamental problem is that universities are not properly funded. That in other climes, using the UNESCO benchmark, people need to, basic amount from the GDP, that percentage should be about 4 to 6%. That's UNESCO's prescription. We're far from that. The last we reached that was, I think, 1975, where the percentage of GDP from educational sector was about 3%. That was in 1975. That's never been close to that till this moment. That poses a great problem, because what it means is that the yearnings, the basic requirements that both staff and students need for education will not be there. So there will be this unrest. So if the issue of funding is resolved and it is properly distributed, there will be no issue. The strike will go. If all what they are talking about is money at every time, how to fund universities, and coming to think of it, you need to take a, and I understand you are a postgraduate student also.
Yes.
So if you go to the universities and see the classrooms the way they are, you look at the infrastructure that are provided, so you see that we're just joking. It's very sad. So somebody needs to step his leg on the ground and say, we want to revamp this, we want to change this. And once these things are provided and the basic remuneration for those who are offering that services, I don't think any right-thinking person wants to go on strike again. Of course, there are other parts, responsibility that is those of the staff, the employees, they are. But you need to do one before you talk about two. It's not done simultaneously.
Okay, Prof, just before we leave the final thing we have to talk about today, at what point, briefly, at what point in the education of a child should we consider harnessing his or her skills?
From primary school. From primary school. That's one point I wanted to emphasize at the very beginning. One thing that has destroyed us as a nation is the so-called quota system in education. Education should be competence-based. If a child from primary school, you see, in China, in China especially, all of these Asian countries that are moving very fast, they identify talents from primary school. You see the talents, and they begin to encourage the person towards that. It's a natural endowment. You help the person to perfect in that area, not imposing. So from primary school, identify, and then begin to teach the person. You will just see the way the person has natural punches. Give the person the basic and what. From primary school should be there. So our primary education system should be strengthened. Secondary education system should be strengthened. By the time they come to university, they're already made up. So it's not a university you begin to start to mold the person, say you want to do skill. You start from primary school. That's why the teachers should be well paid. Their remuneration should be very good. People going to teach in primary school should not see themselves as if they're inferior. No, that's where we miss it. We push people say, because this one couldn't get a good degree, let him go and teach my children. Garbage in, garbage out. They can't give what they don't have. So from primary school, we strengthen the system, strengthen the teachers, strengthen the network, make it competence-based. If you do very well, you go to that reward system. That's the best that we need to do.
All right, thank you very much. Prof, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for your insights and kudos to the great work you're doing in UNIZIK. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we thank Professor Charles Okechukwu Ismoni, Professor of Biopharmaceutics and, of course, Pharmaceutical Biotechnology, and also Vice Chancellor Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka. Thank you, Prof, once more.
Thank you, Prisca.
While education is key to national development and it requires the concerted efforts of everyone to come together and improve on the quality and standard of our education system to get to an enviable heights that can be envied by all and sundry. Till next time on the program In Depth on ABS Television, my name is Prisca Wangwo. Stay safe.